Okay, hopefully the audio comes out. My decent microphone has just died on me, so that's not great. Anyway, let's jump in with the Q&A. I'm in my new house, which is awesome. I don't have my filming space or my training space set up as I want it yet, but I'm gonna start doing live classes once a week once I've got that set up. So anyway, more to come. Let's jump in with your Q&A first, or your questions. So the first thing, how to learn a press with deficit. I can press all three presses on the floor, but when putting hands higher, it feels totally different and I can't get anywhere. Okay, so what happens when we start to go to a deficit, or for some people, it's that bottom part of the press that they just can't get, is because they're not quite flexible enough, or they don't have the shoulder planche strength. So if we're in a press position, so something like this, our hip is this high and we might just be able to get our toes to the floor in that press position. Now, if we can do that and there's enough weight in this direction and we don't fall back in towards underbalance, we can press our legs up in the air because the hip is staying high. Now, what starts to happen if we go into a deficit, so if we want to go down here and we want to bring the toes down lower down here, the hip has to come down. So the hip has to fall down. Now, if the hip falls down, we need to planche more. So the shoulders need to go more in this direction to compensate for the hip going down in that direction. So people who are very, very flexible and struggle with more of the planche movements are going to struggle with a deficit press. The people that are not so mobile like myself and have learned more with this planched position and a lower hip, so it's going to look more like this. I'll put some videos up on the screen of me doing these. So basically, if we're in more of a planche position here, our hip is now here. We need to planche the shoulders so far forwards in this direction to get this hip on top of the hands. So it needs to go on top of the hands, so it needs to go in that direction to get the body to go up. So if you're not so flexible, this is how you learn to press in the first place. If you're very flexible, you basically learn to press here, so you're much happier. So what we need to do is start lowering down through some eccentric planche presses. So if I'm in this position now, I can press with my hips on top of my hands. They're using flexibility, but if I want to use strength, I'm going to have to drop the hands or the feet backwards, and now I'm going to have to planche press like that. So the shoulders have to go further forward. So what we can do to train that, if we don't have it, but we have a standard press, is go up this way, but when we come back down, we planche forward slightly, and the hips have to come down lower to get the toes to the floor. So you could do eccentrics. The other thing, or the other way of doing it, would be to do more planche training. So actually do more tuck planche conditioning, get strong in the planche, and then combine the two and do a planche press. And then that's going to give you the strength to do your deficit press to handstand. Okay, how to gain confidence to do handstands on a higher surface, and is it beneficial for handstands? So I actually use this in my classes quite often to people learning handstands. We elevate our hands up onto yoga blocks, and then if you can go higher, the IKEA steps work really well for this. So one of the benefits of learning to elevate the hands when you do any type of handstand is that you're sending energy straight up instead of over. A lot of people, when they go into handstand, they go forwards, and then their momentum goes forwards, and they have to hit the sweet spot. If not, they overbalance and they go over, or they don't get enough movement and they go underbalance and come back down again. So if you can get used to going up, if you start to use too much energy going into your handstand, you're basically just going to go up and come back down again, you'll be fine. It's like standing up. If I stand up like this, I'm standing straight up into the position, into the stand, instead of going forwards. If I go forwards, I have to put the brakes on or the reverse on to try and catch in that position. So if you can teach yourself to go up, then you can tend to hold a handstand for longer. So a lot of people, when they first go onto a yoga block, use the firm yoga blocks, you can kick up to a wall. To get used to that, we'll find that they can hold for longer than they normally can on the floor, just because of that up movement. Also that the cork yoga blocks is really nice to handstand on. So I'd do that. So I would learn basically on the cork yoga blocks, slowly increase the height so you get up to like an IKEA step. And then the benefit is, especially if you want to start to learn like the deficit presses and stuff like that, handstand push-ups and things, it opens up other possibilities in terms of your training. If you want to go to deficit handstand push-ups and things, you need to be able to handstand on a higher surface. If you want to handstand on canes, if you want to use variations of handstand blocks, you need to go up higher. So there's a lot of benefit in that, and it will also force you to start to build that confidence and strength and conditioning in that range like a deficit. So your hands are higher and your feet are lower, so your hip is coming lower, so there's some benefits in that. Okay, sore wrist protocols for ongoing one-arm handstand training. So this is a really, really common one. And basically when you do any one-arm handstand training, you need to do a lot. So I always recommend my students are going at least 5 or 6 times a week of handstand training, ideally 6 or 7 times a week handstand training. Now, if you're doing that, if you're doing one-arm handstand, your wrists are probably going to get unhappy. So one of the things that I don't do too much wrist conditioning by itself, just isolating the wrist. What I like to do is more thoracic, shoulder, forearm stretching. The easiest and quickest way to do that is a passive hang. So if you're not hanging daily, you should be. If you're doing lots of handstand work, so basically that creates more space. If I'm lacking mobility through my back, through my shoulders, through my forearms, when it gets to the wrists are going to take all the stress from all the combination of that being tight, because they're the weakest link. If I can open up through there, then suddenly I've got more access to more range of the wrist. So that's number one, I would work on those things. And then I would at least go every other session on handstand blocks. So what handstand blocks do, they give us an out. So basically if I'm in this position, it's harder to do this than it is to do this. So it makes it happier on the wrist. It gives it an out if you're gripping hold of something or you have some flexion in the fingers. You could elevate the wrist only, so be into that position so it decreases the angle. But I'm a big fan of using handstand blocks. I definitely done that when I was learning, and I use them a lot still now because I find it's actually easier to obviously to pull yourself around on a handstand block, so there's less pressure on the wrist, but it's just easier to one-arm handstand. But that big one is having it out. So instead of being demanding all that extension, I can have some flexion and it feels better on the wrist. And it's also some variability in terms of not doing the same thing every day. Also watch the surface you're on. So if you're on concrete all the time, play around with some wood surface, find a board that you're happy with. I don't like something that soft because I find I sink into it more. Like something like a gymnastic floor is really hard on the wrists when you handstand a lot, especially doing one-arm things. We know you practice daily, but do you keep any rest days? So basically my rest days are more just my balance days where I'll just do a couple of handstands up to maybe half an hour of one-arm handstand training. I'm trying to get a bit more of this volume back now with my one-arm work. So I'd actually call that a rest day. So even though I'm training for about half an hour, I'd call that a rest day because I'm not doing any strength work. So my strength work is my handstand push-ups, my planche, my levers, my chin-ups. I'm trying to get good at bar muscle-ups and things like that at the moment. So that's my training day. So I've just been in the gym just now and I've done front squats, planches, front lever pulls, so like a circuit of that, and then I've done some overhead pressing and some handstand push-ups. So to me, that's a training day. Tomorrow, I'm just going to do a balance day where I'll do a little bit of one-arm work. I'm also doing more coaching. But in my coaching sessions, whether they're Zoom sessions, in-person sessions, or classes, I am demoing stuff as well. But again, I don't call that training. What is your opinion on practicing press to handstand with ankle weights? So that's something I play with. I don't actually do that in my training sessions. Like very occasionally I might do a set of stools or press play with ankle weights on, but I don't use it that often in my press training. And I wouldn't program it. I would sometimes tell people to have a play with it, but I've never programmed it ongoing. Training for a specific goal. Mine is currently aiming for full range of motion handstand push-ups. How often do you train the skill itself along with pull and push training? This is very challenging to answer, and I really can't answer it without knowing specifics about the individual. So when it comes to that, if someone's strong enough with the handstand push-ups but don't have the balance, I wouldn't actually do any or very little weighted pushing training, so like overhead pressing and stuff like that. If I think they're strong enough, I'd do a lot of work on the skill. So I'll be doing a majority of skill work in the session. So actually doing handstand pushing reps, but just play around with the repetition. So I want people to begin for the main section of their training around the 5 rep mark. So if they can do 5 rep handstand push-up variations, I'm gonna pick that over doing 5 reps overhead barbell pressing and stuff like that. But I think if there's a gap in their week, if they're weak in the movement, then they need to be doing some strength, like more strength training and hit a hard 5x5. Then we will start to use more push training, so overhead pressing and that sort of thing for handstand push-ups. So I hope that makes sense. It's very dependent on the individual. The rep ranges stay the same, but the selection of the exercises might change. Okay, what is the ideal handstand routine that is 20 minutes long, flexibility and strength taken care of elsewhere? So in terms of handstands, I like to do a good warm up, which includes the flexibility. So I know you've said the flexibility and strength is taken care of elsewhere, but I would include that. I'd always do stretching at the start, get the body ready, especially around thoracic, upper back area, hip flexors, quads, hamstrings. So get that out of the way, and then go into some conditioning work. So if you're new to handstands, we'll be doing more like line drills and things like that to get some conditioning work in, get the body into one segment. If not, it's chest to handstand. If you can do chest to handstand easy and you're freestanding, and your freestanding is first kick up 45 seconds plus, I normally would go into conditioning holds freestanding and then go into positioning, shapes, things like that for the next section, and then work a skill at the end. So it's very dependent on the individual, but that's roughly the direction I would go in. And when I start doing my online classes, my live classes, they're going to be around the 20 to 30 minutes long, so that'll be perfect. You'll be able to see then, and I'll change that around on the day. Same as I do on my handstand classes are in-person handstand classes are 60 minutes normally. There'll be 10-15 minutes of stretching, flexibility work at the start, then there'll be conditioning, and then there'll be balance, skill work, shapes and things like that, and then some max freestanding holds at the end normally. Okay, what are the important components to keep a straight line in a handstand? How to train to have a straight line with elevated shoulders plus always returning to the straight line, for example, from tuck. My problem is that my shoulders are too open, my chest sticks out, my hips tilt. There's something happens all the time. Now, obviously, this is very individual, but basically what I would do is have home positions. So number one home position is your straight handstand. So you need to work out what's a straight handstand for you, and then you have your positions. So the main positions you would normally train is straddle and tuck positions. So once you've got home positions for the straight, the tuck and the straddle, and then it's working on transitions to go from your home position number one, your handstand, open to your straddle or your tuck, so another home position, and then return back to number one home position with the goal of getting it exactly the same. Now, if you're very open in the shoulders and in the hips, or if your hips really like to fold, normally when you go back to your home position number one, back to your straight position, you've still got signs of a closed hip or a closed shoulder. Now, if that happens, what we need to do is try and take you backwards slightly in the progression. So you might go back to doing wall drills. So a really good straddle one against the wall or tuck one against the wall is the handstand just in front of the wall, heel pull off or be in a freestanding handstand already, open to your straddle so your butt touches the wall and you hit into your strong straddle or tuck position. And then from there, you go back to your straight position with the goal of having your heels touch, and you reset that home position again, and then keep practicing that. Okay, training in a calorie surplus to gain muscle strength versus losing weight for handstand specific skills. What's your take on that? After a week-long water-only fast, my one-arm handstand progressed faster than 2 months before without changing the routine. After the fast, I also did my first pike press and handstand push-ups ever. The difference in difficulty was night and day. I lost around 5 kilograms, which I naturally gained back later, and the skills kept getting harder till I lost them again without changing the program. So basically what happens is if we're holding on to weight, or if we're slightly heavier and we're not quite in our sweet spot, it's going to make a bigger difference. It's a bit like using ankle weights or a weight vest or something like that. Basically what will happen if we're in a really good position, you won't notice it, and it'll actually in some ways make things easier. But if you're slightly out of your position and you're slightly heavier, it's going to make things 10 times harder. So the lighter you are, the easier normally these bodyweight skills are, unless you can use the weight to your advantage. So yes, it's going to happen where the lighter you are, the easier it is. What can happen when you're doing things like fast, or if you dramatically change your food, you can get like a bit of a high where the body is feeling amazing from like detoxing, if you like, and that high will transform into you feeling better. You lose a little bit of weight, you're feeling better in yourself, you're more positive. Everything's going to feel much easier. Now, obviously, that doesn't last that long. So what we want to be looking at is have somewhere in the middle. It's really challenging when you're trying to gain muscle and trying to lose body fat at the same time. All I could say is try and be as balanced as you can, and try not to go extremes of one direction. Now, obviously on long fasts, there's going to be a point where you can't do that anymore, and it's going to start to counteract and go in the wrong direction. We want to stay in a positive direction. So I would just be having some balance as best you can, and then know that if you've got excess body fat, stuff's going to be harder in general, not just training, everything. So if you decrease the excess body fat, things are going to get easier. I definitely feel that, especially as I get older. It's harder to lose the weight, harder to keep lean, and things definitely get harder if I'm feeling fatigued and heavier. What are your next big goals after achieving the planche? Basically for me, I'm trying to keep progressing slightly on everything as I go. One arm handstands is tricky to do that because it takes so much time. Consistency on my one arms I would like to have. My right is pretty good where I can just normally one arm all the time. Left is a bit like 50%. So I'd like to keep that up that a little bit more. I want to have full middle splits, full front splits that's available cold. And just keep chipping away at those. I'm 46 now, so if I can keep progressing slowly on all those little goals, then I'm going to be more than happy with that. Obviously I need to be realistic that some things are probably going to get harder as I go. I can't keep focusing on all those things at the same time, and you're going to have to ride that a little bit. But I'm hoping that as I get older, I'm also getting wiser with my training, and I can put certain things on maintenance as I go. But I'd like to get clean bar muscle ups, just as I like to do those. A bit of fun. I've got clean ring muscle ups, but bar muscle ups would be good to go. I'm really sort of enjoying the more calisthenics type training, so that's why I like the planche and all that as well, but it's trying to juggle all the one arm handstands and flexibility work as well.